Datari, Jason, thank you both for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. I want to jump right into the conversation and get a sense of how you all think about creatives, but also about audience. And as we're talking about Black creatives who are looking to seek funding and investment, the first thing I'm thinking about is how do you all think about audience when we talk about Blackness? It's one thing in the United States, and I imagine it's a distinctly different thing in the UK. So, Datari, first, I'll let you talk. I'll let you go first. How do you think about what Black audience means and who that encompasses when we're talking about the content and the things that we're putting out into the world for audiences?
That's a good question, Jared. I think, as a creative, I think when you're starting out, you're trying to get your work out into the world. So I think you probably, I think a lot of creatives probably don't think about that as much first. I think they're trying to get their voice out there, whatever they wrote, whatever they are passionate about, whatever story they're passionate about sharing. They're probably focused on that, feeling like the culture would appreciate this, but they're trying to service their own story. But I think as you get to the point I've been doing this almost 30 years now. And I think, I always think about audience first. Our audience, I mean, we're probably what, 12% of the population, but we have the biggest spending power, right? And, they are, I think today they are making less movies than the movies I grew up on, which to me, like the 90s was, I think, the sweet spot. That was probably the best decade in film history for Black films. I mean, you could say maybe the blaxploitation era of the 70s, but I feel like in the 90s you had, you know, you look at Fox, for instance. You had Martin, you had Living Single, you had In Living Color, you had on the WB, you had whole nights where you had the Jamie Foxx show and the Wayans brothers and Malcolm and Eddie and Homeboys in Outer Space. Like they don't have networks that program that many Black shows in the way that they did in the 90s. They don't have, again, like when you look at the movies that came out of the 90s, from The Boys in the Hoods to Menace Societies to New Jack Cities to Love Jones to Soul Food. I mean, there were probably like 50 movies, or more, that were literally tailored and catered to the Black audience. And you just don't have that anymore. And so I think as content creators of color, I think it is our responsibility to service that audience, right? I think that's why, Tyler Perry has been so successful. That's why, Will Packer has been very successful. And I've been very successful. I think I do think about audience first and foremost as I'm trying to, get our stories out there.
Jason, thinking about this from a UK perspective, I think about how television in the UK and film in the UK tend to have like a different tone to them. They approach the content and the story in a different kind of way. How do you think about Black audience, and how might it be unique or similar to the way we think about it in the States?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Datari. It's a great question. But before I jump on that, I do want to touch on what Datari said. We had an incredible 90s of incredible Black content. But Datari, a point you make now is we're seeing success, but also ownership of that content. You have your own production company, right? Martin has his, Will has his, Taraji. We're actually seeing more access, ownership, and story driven by us. And you're absolutely right, 12% of the population, but I think 88% at the very least of the culture. And finally, that now is also coming from the storytellers. You talk about the Black exploitation era. We definitely moved out of that in the 90s and 80s, but still weren't 100% in charge of our stories, right? You look at Eddie Murphy when he talked about coming to America, they said that he had to have a white guy. Says it's a great story, but you have to have a white guy. You have to have a token white guy, otherwise we can't get audiences to make it. So now with leaders like yourself and storytellers like yourself, taking ownership of your own productions and producing incredible content that is still resonating, I think that that's an important turn for us in this part of our storytelling. But Jarrett, back to your question. Very strange position. I have the fortune of being the GM of Anscape, a Black-led content studio out of the Walt Disney Company, where we have a lot of autonomy to tell our stories. Our stories are predominantly focused on the African American experience, right, or the Black America experience. And as you can tell from my accent, I am not African American, but I'm Black, right? And I've always looked at this as it's the diaspora. And there's certain aspects of every culture and every heritage that range through irrespective of geographic location. And you've seen that through storytelling over the years. And I'm going to go back to the 90s because it's the content I grew up on, but the house parties of the world, the Love Jones, all these incredible films that were coming out of Black America resonated in the UK. And I think I say this, as much as we have similarities, there is without a doubt, I don't think anyone can deny it when it comes to the arts and culture, not just non-Black people, but Black people out of the US owe a lot to African Americans, right? For driving that culture forward, because House Party is a cult classic for everyone of my generation in the UK. It's championed by the Black audiences, but the white kids watched it too, and they've grown up on it. And so far, we've seen the same with hip hop. So I think Black culture and the roots of it, and that's why I like to look at it as the diaspora, our music, the way we tell stories, the heritage of our stories, and even how they come to life today is still prevalent throughout the world. But the African American filmmakers and storytellers of the 80s and 90s really drove that forward for us. And we're seeing that change. When I say change, we're seeing that become more endemic of Black filmmaking. You look at Supercell, right? Born out of a UK filmmaker and a UK story, which did incredibly well for Netflix globally. So I like to look at it as the diaspora. There are definitely cultural nuances of the two audiences, but there are definitely things that we all identify as Black audiences. And as long as we're identifying in the world that we're telling it in an authentic way, right? If we're telling a story about South Central LA, we're going to tell it about South Central LA, which is authentic to South Central LA story. But the guys in South London are going to appreciate some of the nuances of that. But in the same way, when Supercell is telling a story about Southwest London, it's going to tell it authentically. So I think as long as we're being authentic to the slice of the diaspora that we're trying to tell the story about, other parts of the diaspora will also lean into it. And we've seen a lot of that. And again, I think credit to American filmmakers like yourself, Datari, African-American filmmakers like yourself, Datari, that have moved that agenda forward. Ratman in the UK has done a phenomenal job. But I can't speak for him. I don't even know him personally, but I'm sure he would say a lot of that credit is the inspiration that he saw growing up, right, in the 90s and 80s of Black filmmakers like yourself telling the same story. So I think the audience is ubiquitous. We're everywhere. There are nuances, as there are in Blackness. The Anscape name comes from we're Black and, right? I'm Black and British, right? And in New York, right? Datari, you can add a dozen ands to you being Black, Jarrett the same. So for us, as long as the ands are right, we're always going to lead with the Blackness. But as long as the and is relevant to the audience that we're trying to capture, sorry, is relevant to the universe of that audience we're trying to capture, I think it has global appeal to Black audiences and wider in most cases.
Yeah.
I want to in a moment kind of move into talking about independent financing and kind of y'all's experience starting there. But you touched on authenticity, and that's something that I feel like is such a buzzword for us right now, right? We hear people talking about things being authentic and authenticity quite a bit, and I'm curious how you all think about what that word means now, and if it means the same thing, but like what does it mean for a piece of storytelling to be authentic or to have authenticity in our storytelling? And Datari, I'll let you take that first. Like, how when you hear that word, what does it mean to you? And is it something that you're thinking about, or are you tired of the word? Like, how are you thinking about authenticity in our concept?
I think the best advice you can give to aspiring storytellers is to write something or to tell stories that that are close to you, that you can be authentic to, that you come from that environment. That's why John Singleton made Boys in the Hood. He came from that area where they shot the movie, which is the 60s Crip neighborhood in LA. You know, you want to tell stories that are authentic to you, you know, that you can speak on, you know. And I mean, going back to the first question, Jason, too, I like all of the Black people that created these TV shows back then, Martin, Jamie, all these creators, they have production companies in. They were creating their own content in the 90s. There were more buyers in the 90s, though. There were more networks in the 90s. You know, things are shrinking, and as you see all these mergers, there actually are less buyers today than there were in the 90s, and it's going to continue to consolidate. You know, it's, you know, you think about the studios are merging. Disney bought 20th Century Fox. You know, Fox was a separate studio before. Now it's owned by Disney. Disney owns Hulu. Disney owns ABC. They own Marvel. They own the Star Wars franchise. Amazon now owns MGM. Skydance just bought Paramount. It's going to continue to shrink. So you've always had, these guys have always been content creators. They've always had production companies. They've always been producers, but it's just less buyers today. But going to, answering your question about being authentic, I think you have to be able to tell stories that, you have to tell things that are close to you, that are authentic to you. That's really important. When we were making They Clone Tyrone, with Jewel Taylor, who is a kid, him and his partner Tony, who I mentored before they had an agent. I tried to help them get their first agent. Really believed in them before anybody else pretty much knew who they were. When we were making that movie, I'm a kid from Oakland, California. Pimp culture was a big thing where I grew up, so it was important, as I was gonna get my partner, Jamie Foxx, to come on board and us be producers on this movie and him to play Slick Charles. It was very important that we got those nuances right, that we were authentic to that culture, because again, when you put out things, you want people to say they got that right. That's very authentic to the characters and the era, and what being a pimp is, or what being a call girl is, or so I mean that's just what I come from. It's got to be authentic to me, so or else I can't. I don't want to tell a story if I can't be authentic and sit in it, or know what I'm talking about.
Jason, before you answer, I do have to just shout out Oakland. Born at Kaiser, Oakland, and from the Bay Area. Anybody that's in the audience that's watching, shout out to Oakland. Um, Jason, talk to us about what authenticity means to you, and when you hear that word and thinking about content.
Yeah, look, I agree with Datari. We want to make sure when you're capturing something, you authentically capture the essence of that particular character or story. So it's important to write and talk about things that you have lived experiences in. I fully agree with that. I will say this, Jarrett, and you said you nodded to it. Like it does bore me a bit when I hear about authenticity now. To a certain degree, it feels like a buzzword that was born out of a particular era. I think Black filmmakers have always been authentic. They've never purported to be anything but that. So for me, it kind of is in, again, like in the DNA of the storytelling. You talk about stories about your neighborhoods. Ryan Coogler, Fruitville Station, right? More than authentic, a true story. And, a son of Oakland wanted to tell that story. Here's the other thing. Ryan Coogler has probably never been to Wakanda, right? None of us have yet, right? But still told an authentic superhero story. But I think he brought the authenticity of his upbringing and his environment to that story. And I think it's the same thing with John Singleton. He's done a few things that have been outside of the hood, general audience, but they feel authentic to him and his environment. Same with Spike, even to this day, he never tells a story without bringing the authenticity of the environment that birthed the Spike Lee, the filmmaker that we know. So I think authenticity can be twofold. I think you should definitely talk about stories and environments that are dear and true to you, and you should be able to authentic, because I think it has more of a resonance, because I said it came out of an era, and you can go as far as blaxploitation, where we weren't the people writing or telling those stories, right? So that's fine. Like if you want to tell an Oakland pimp story if you come from it and you're part of the environment, you can authentically tell it, and it comes across authentically rather than a caricature. So I think that is important. I also think we should allow people. I'm a big believer. We help a lot of up and coming young filmmakers get their first break, and we're part of this big machine. To Datari's point, like consolidation is a thing, and most of it's happening right here from this building. We're part of this huge business, and I always say to them, I don't want you to finish on $1 million film at Anscape. My ambition is in 10 years' time, Kevin Feige or Kathleen Kennedy's like, hey, tell me more about that Jatari guy. Like, we want him to do the next Star Wars trilogy, which is what we're seeing. So I see we have a role here in Disney is I always say freshman year of Hollywood, right? We're bringing in the talent and they're telling the authentic stories, their lived experience. We're shooting a story right now, which is a very lived experience. Young directors, never written, never directed a feature, never even directed a short, but really wants to tell this, and we felt no one else can tell it. I believe his name is Jazz Summers, and the project will come out in the fall. I believe Jazz will move on within the how should I say, the pipeline here at the Walt Disney Company, or certainly through Hollywood, through this opportunity we've given him, because he's going to tell a story that's authentic to his experience, and someone else is going to be like, hey, we need more authenticity. It's not the same type of story, but we need that authentic experience in this story.
I want
Before
to.
you move on, Jared, I want to just say one thing about what Jason said, too, which is very key. For close to 100 years, we didn't tell our own stories. We didn't. Somebody else did, and so just in the last 30 years, we've been able to tell our own stories. So I think that's why being authentic is so important, because again, we didn't get to tell those stories in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the birth of the nations and these movies that were made. I mean, even up into the 90s. I mean, Driving Miss Daisy wasn't told by us. Morgan Freeman was in the movie, but it wasn't told. It wasn't told by us. Glory wasn't told by us. That was told by Edward Zwick, right? Like, I mean, Green Book wasn't told by us, and that came out just a couple of years ago and won Best Picture. So that's why that word is a buzzword, because we don't always get to tell our own stories. And all those filmmakers that Jason talked about, all of their first movies were based on what they came up in and what they knew. Spike, you think Do the Right Thing, She's Gotta Have It, School Days was on his experience at Morehouse. But ultimately, when you start off, to Jason's point, all filmmakers mostly start with something very personal that is very authentic to how they grew up. But I think the difference between the creator, all of the people that we talked about, Jamie, Will, Martin, the Waynes, at this point, you want a global audience. You do want to break out of just where you came from. You want to be global. We have 2 movies coming out tomorrow, which we've been producing for the last 5 years for Apple TV, called Number One on the Call Sheet. And the movies, it was an idea that I had, and I called Jamie and I called Reggie Hudlin and Kevin Hart. And these movies are about the history of Black leading men and women in Hollywood over the last 60 years. And we have everybody in these movies, from Denzel to Will to The Rock to the Waynes to Viola to Halle. And again, you start out personal from where you came from, but ultimately the goal is to be global. So,
Well, I think that's actually a great way to kind of segue into what I want to talk about. I want to get into like independent financing, right? And kind of get a sense of y'all's experience with independent financing. And you talked about like those first movies, right? When we were first kind of getting into being able to do storytelling. And you're obviously, Datari, doing it at such a high level now. But what was it like when you started trying to get financing for a film? And what did you walk away with from that experience?
that's an interesting question. It sort of happened for me by accident. I am too also a part of the Disney ABC. I was in the ABC Talent Showcase with Meghan Markle in 2004. So before I had created my first television show the very next year, and before I had made my first movie. And when I was trying to get my first screenplay, it was a movie called Video Girl that I wrote that starred Megan Good and Ruby Dee. I was trying to get that movie made at a studio. I went through a couple of situations where the script was optioned by Chuck Roven, big producer now, who produced The Dark Knight, and also he produced Oppenheimer. But at the time, he was making, his company Mosaic was making urban films. They made Idlewild, the Outcast movie, and the movie didn't work. There was an executive that worked for him. And after the movie didn't work, they didn't want to do urban anymore. That happens a lot too, like in our business where, you know, a company will, you know, want to make certain kind of films. And when they don't work, they sort of move away from that. And so, and then another woman who, Laretha Jones at the time, who worked for MTV Films, who, you know, I don't want to say she was a mentor, but she was definitely took a liking to me and was trying to help me with the screenplay. And at that time, dance movies were a thing. You know, people were making the Stomp the Yards and You Got Serves and you know, Honeys and all these movies. And so you know, I always saw my movie being made at a studio and going through all of these situations. A friend of mine said, hey, well, if you got Megan Good attached and you got Ruby Dee attached, who was just coming off of an Oscar nomination for playing Denzel's mother in American Gangster, the friend was like, I got a guy who may be able to finance the movie. The only thing is you got to shoot it in Louisiana, which is where he lived, in Baton Rouge. Louisiana was what Georgia is today. You know, in the 2000s, everyone was shooting all the productions in Louisiana because of the tax credit. Now, Georgia has been that place for the last decade, and New Jersey is going to be the next place. But I had never thought about making this movie independently. To be honest, I always thought this movie was going to be a studio movie. I flew to Louisiana and met with the guy. He showed me proof of funds, and the financing turned out to be real. And then I was just like, man, I guess I got to try to make this movie. And I really kind of, you know, I almost had a nervous breakdown making this movie. I had to wear all the hats. I produced it. I wrote it. I had to be in the movie. But it changed my whole life, to be honest, because at that time, Netflix wasn't making their own content. So when we completed the movie, Netflix licensed the movie, BET licensed the movie, E1 did a limited theatrical on the movie, and by the grace of God, the investor got his money back. And he was looking at me like, okay, now what's next? And the thing I'll add about that was when when the script was being optioned that I wrote to production companies, I wasn't even going to be a producer on that movie initially. I was just looking at it like, okay, I wrote more things. This is my way into the business. So God just had a different plan for me, because all of those situations that didn't work out, that were a little bit heartbreaking for me at the time, it changed my life because it made me go make this movie. I learned production. I had to put a budget together. I had to hire a crew, and I really made this movie on my own with Megan Good, who believed in me, of course. It changed my whole life. And after that, I was like, I'm never going to a studio again. I'm gonna just continue to make my own movies. And that turned into me, you know, raising financing for over 30 feature films and working with close to over 20 first-time filmmakers.
Jason, talk to us about your first experiences with this.
Yeah, mine's obviously different to Datari. I sit in a corporation, but my first experience with independent finance, and it's just an anecdote of a story, is for a dear friend of mine. Her name is Fiona Lamptey. She's an incredible producer out of the UK. She was at Netflix actually as the head of features for a while, but this was over 10, maybe even 15 years ago. But Fiona was making her first short film, and this was before I was in this properly. And she sent a text message asking for friends and family to support this. So we could each give £100. £100 is about, I don't know, $180 in today's money. And you would get a producer credit for being part of that. And that's how she financed her short film. It was called He Took My Skin Off. And that's when I really realized that people were trying new things. This was almost 15 years ago, before the big opportunity around crowdsourcing and crowdfunding films came about. But I've been in this role for a while, and I've seen a lot of the things Datari talks about. And one of the things that keeps me up at night a lot is making investment decisions right? Remember, our entire ethos here is creating authentic Black stories, making investment decisions on projects that don't work out. And rather than someone saying Jason made a bad call there, it's like this whole thing doesn't work. We're going to stop doing it, right? So that sits heavy on my shoulders. That rather than just saying we had the wrong executive, by God's grace, that hasn't happened, right? And say we had the wrong executive, made some wrong decisions there. It just becomes this type of storytelling doesn't work anymore. And thankfully, Disney has been very supportive. And they've got behind everything that we've wanted to do, and they've got behind it in a meaningful way, and it has proved. And that's another thing I always say: it's one thing investing and saying, "Hey, we're going to make this type of film as a big studio," but if we don't invest in the industry of it and promoting the film, it's not going. You know what I mean? It's all boats rises. So that's a concern. But we get a lot of young filmmakers have scripts in hands, multiple years, 5, 6 years. And I hope Jazz doesn't mind me telling this story, but in Jazz's scenario, his family were going to remortgage their home to help pay for it, right? To make I don't know, a low six-figure film. And we're like, don't do that, because that film will not be successful. This is not a six-figure film. This needs to be a seven-figure film. So we felt very fortunate we've been able to block and save some of these really good scripts. I think, which is often the case, like they just didn't have the backing, so they went to self-fund it, and it became a $200,000-300,000 SAG ultra low thing, rather than being a $3-4 million film, and everyone sees the value. Unfortunately, people do look at it and be like, "Hey, it's not worth my time because it's a lower investment." So we're seeing a lot of that. We're trying to help with a lot of it. I agree with Datari to a certain degree. Sometimes it's better to make it yourself, self-finance it, go and sell it for a good markup. And there's so many models in our streaming environment now where actually that becomes a better financial model for most. And people always laugh at Tubi. Like that's a running joke, right? The film's on Tubi. And I'm like, first of all, you know how hard it is to get a film made, let alone distributed. But the economics behind Tubi are actually really, really good. If you have a good film, it will pay tenfold for you. So I don't want to say don't come to big studios, but sometimes actually the independent route, if you can find the right investment, right, and not just cut yourself short. The film should be made for 2 million, but you're willing to sacrifice and make it for 300,000. That never works. I really want to be clear about that. Like stick to what you think the film is worth and make it for that. But we come in, and what I like to say is we offer beyond the finance, right? Because we are part of this big machine. We're able to put you in rooms with other writers, with producers, and similar to your story, Datari, a bunch of people have come out thinking, "Oh, I thought I was going this way, but I've learned a lot because you put these arms around me." And I always say that, like, we often bring kids into the room, and that in no way trying to be in any way discredit them, but they are young, new, up and coming filmmakers. But we put our arms around them, right? And we have some grown-ups in the room that help them take it to another level. So we still have that independent feel about it. Like we're going to do this within a budget. You're a new filmmaker, but we have some people, right? Some often of the caliber of Datari who can be in the room and help guide that. So, for example, with Jazz Summers, we have Mo McRae, who is directed a lot of nothing and is an actor himself. Mo is producing this. He is the person that is this Jazz's mentor. He is the person we trust, and he's the person I have conversations, candid conversations with about what we need. And he helps bring that to bear on screen. And we're helping Jazz also learn throughout the process. So ours are slightly different. We play with with a bit of an indie lens, but I call it a grown-up startup, right? Like we're not a real startup. We're a grown-up startup. We know the lights are going to stay on for a while. We can try a few things, and we can put some grown-up money behind some of the things we really believe in.
I'll just say too, you know, after making that first movie, I really adjusted my satellite and because at that time it was a downtime in our industry in terms of, studios and networks making Black content. Pretty much you only had Tyler Perry, who had a deal at Lionsgate, who was making, movies for a certain audience. And you had, at that time, Will Packer was still partners with a guy named Rob Hardy, and they had a company called Rainforest Films, and they had a deal at Screen Gems, and they were making the Stomp the Yards, the Gospel, the Obsessed. They were making those movies for a Black audience as well. And I think for me, as I started surveying the landscape, I was like, there's no person of color that is making, art house movies that are going to Sundance, on a regular basis. So that was a lane that I saw that was wide open for me. And we made a lot of movies like under $2 million. But when you think about the business, you look at the first Saw movie was made for $1.2 million, which created a $1 billion franchise. Jason Blum, the first Paranormal Activity movie was made for like $20,000, which created, it had like 6 or 7 spinoffs. And Jason Blum today, I mean, his company is close to being worth $1 billion. And it started off these micro budget movies. There's so many, Robert Shea, who started New Line. I mean, it started off of the horror movies like Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street. The first Friday the 13th was made on film for, I think, under $1 million. So I think, and even when you look at Miramax, I mean, Reservoir Dogs was made for $1 million. Like that, the whole Miramax model, most of those movies were made in the beginning for under $2 million. So that was the model I was following. And like I said, it changed my life. And we discovered so many filmmakers. I made a movie on an iPhone with Matthew Cherry called 9 Rides. We made for under $100,000. The next movie he directed, he won an Oscar for, Hair Love, So I produced Sam Levinson's first movie, who went on to create Euphoria. So making those independent movies, we discovered so many filmmakers and so many actors too, the Michael Rainey Jr.'s, the Meghan Markles, the Ryan Destinies. These are people that I put, in their first movies. So yeah, that just, the
Yeah.
independent space is very much, very important to the culture.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. It is very important to the culture, and to Tari's point, the creativity and the ingenuity that you get because you have less of a budget actually drives the film and the storytelling much better. And Tari, I'm sure you're talking about Love, which was Michael Rainey Jr.'s first film, right?
Absolutely.
So incredible film. We fell in love with Love, and Sheldon Candice, the director, is about to direct a movie for us now, right? So, that for me was one of the reasons we chose Sheldon. When we found out what the budget was and the quality of the film and the star that was born out of it, right? And the stars that were in it too. And that's another thing. You can't disband the village because everyone got around that film and said, "Hey, I'm willing to do this." The Commons, like there's some incredible names in that film. And it turned out to be a beautiful film. So yeah, absolutely.
You guys are talking a bit about models, and I kind of want to hang out there a little bit. For folks that I think about someone like myself, right? I have an award-winning book. I've been a journalist that's been celebrated throughout my career pretty well for a while. I have some credentials behind me, right? And moving into like film and television in a different kind of way, I'm curious about like what kind of models you all are seeing that are useful for people who are wanting to do their first film or their first documentary or their first show or things like that. What kind of models are you seeing that are kind of democratizing funding access for Black creatives right now?
I would just say for me, I think the motto, and this is for Black and for white filmmakers, has always been to make your first movie independently. I think filmmakers are growing up very fast today. Like if you think about, Coogler makes Fruitvale Station for $800,000. He's able to get Octavia Spencer coming off an Oscar for The Help to be in Fruitvale Station. His next movie, he goes from an $800,000 movie. His next movie is a $45 million movie in Creed. And then his third movie is Black Panther, which is $150 million. Think all of the filmmakers are growing up very fast like that. Ryan Johnson's first movie was $400,000 called Brick that premiered at Sundance. The next movie he did was Looper, which is like a $30 million movie. And then he's directing Star Wars, his third movie. So, you look at Ava, made, I want to say I Will Follow for probably $100,000. Then she made Middle of Nowhere for $250, became the first Black woman to win Best Director at Sundance. And then her third movie is Selma, which is, probably 40 to 50 million. And the next one is $100 million budget. So all of the filmmakers, if you, you know, if you can make something, here's the why you should make the movie for independently and for no money. I had another producer tell me, and I already knew this. I asked him a rhetorical question. I won't say who it is, one of the biggest producers in the business. I said, why did you hire this filmmaker who had directed $1 million movie that didn't even have real actors in it, and hire the filmmaker to direct? His next movie was $100 million movie. And he said, well, that's just it. If you could make something really great for no money, where if you have 2 or 3 bad days, you might not even finish the movie. If you can make something great for no money, then you can make something great when you have every resource known to man. And you have, you know, an A-list producer who can help you with the A-list talent. Of course you can direct Bad Boys. Of course you can direct, you know, movies of this scale if you can make something super small that's really great. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing Stephen Caple come off $1 million movie to land, and then his next movie is Creed 2, and then his third movie is the Transformers. You know, like that's how quickly you get to go. So you know, to the big leagues if you can make something really great. And again, that's really been since the beginning of time. You know, Quentin's first movie was $1 million. Soderbergh's first movie, Sex Lies Videotape, was $1 million. I mean, that is, you know, Paul Thomas Anderson's first movie, Hard 8, was $1 million. Like that's everybody starts off small and then goes to the bigger budget movie. So to me, I think it's always that's the way to go, in my humble opinion.
Yeah,
Jason, how do you see people getting money these days to be able to do these things?
first of all, I agree with Datari on the model. It makes sense, and I always call it the Hollywood credit system, right? You got your first small loan, right? You got your $10 check, and you did really well with that. You made a good investment. Now they're going to give you something more, and you're going to turn that into a good investment. So here's a step, and you have to go through those steps. Also, do not discount what you learn on that first independent project, right? To Datari's point, you do everything. One of our first film, Three Ways on Hulu, Jamal Aidoo, writer, producer, editor, right? He did everything on that. And now he knows all of those roles. So it makes him an incredibly impactful filmmaker. If he gets $100 million film, he knows what to do. Not that he has to, but if he has to muck in and do something more, there is not that, hey, I'm an A-list producer or A-list filmmaker. I do not do this. There is that grit and that hustle and that determination of starting there. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. We've seen another model that works well is also the shorts, right? Relatively low investments, almost a proof of concept too, right? And we've seen a lot of shorts turn into feature films, smaller investment, lighter lift, and something that you can also travel around, you get the acclaim and people start to see your name. And then maybe an investor or a studio says, hey, we want to turn that short into a feature. Or another case scenario is we want you to direct this feature or produce this feature for us. So I'm a big believer of, you know, learning right from the street team level before you hit the penthouse, for sure.
I would love to get a sense from y'all, and we're getting tight on time, but like, give me an example, either of an experience that you've had or of someone that you've heard that was a useful kind of example of a way to start working with an investor, or to build a relationship with an investor to be able to get funded to do the work that you're interested in.
Here's the thing, you know, when you're raising money independently, it is very much the same system as Hollywood. And I'll tell you why. Like, I always used to say this: if my skin was another color, I could raise $10 million in the Starbucks. But when you're a person of color, you know, they want to know, they're looking at everything. They're looking at what you drive, they look at what kind of watch you got, they want to know where your office is at, they want to know where you live. Because people really don't want to give people money that don't already have money. Just being honest. Like that is a thing. And if you take someone's money and they don't make the money back, you know, people will hear about it that they didn't get their money back. So it's like making a movie in the studio system that doesn't make the money back for the studio. Well, they put you in director's jail. It's harder for a filmmaker to get the next movie made. It really is the same system. Now, if you make a movie independently and the investor does get his money back, people hear about that too. That becomes something that you can say. You can say, hey, you know, we made this movie, it did this, it made this much money, and that becomes a calling card to be able to bring more investors in the fold. Like I said, I sort of fell into this situation on an accident. And what I learned with making my first movie was having to, do all those roles, be in the movie, wrote the movie, produced the movie, is what I learned to sort of fine tune that to my next movie was I didn't own that movie, which it was the movie that I wrote. The guy who financed it, I had a back end on the movie and points, but he controlled the film LLC. And so what I learned moving forward was, okay, I'm gonna make my next movie even smaller than I made my first movie, which was a really tiny movie called Dysfunctional Friends, that went to South by Southwest. But I owned the movie outright, and I went and made it for a fraction of what I made my first movie for, which was really small, and really just created a model where I can make these movies for under $1 million, have ownership in them, build a library. But I do think that you have to start out small. It's like Spike made what She's Gotta Have It, I think, for what was it, like $100 grand or something like that, and it was a very small budget. But he owns that movie. Ava made her first 2 movies for very small, but she owns her movies. So listen, this is what I'll say. I don't think there's always more than one way of doing things, right? Like, there's no perfect model, but I think the short business for me, I'm always like, if you're gonna go spend 25,000 on a short, why not just try to make the movie for $100,000 or two? Because again, Ava's done that. I mean, I think Clerks was made for $20,000. Chasing Amy was made with Ben Affleck for $250,000. There's so many examples of movies that, I mean, we made Love for under $1 million, and we had Common, Danny Glover, Dennis Haysbert, Michael K. Williams. I mean, we had stars at every role, making good, because truthfully, if it's a good piece of material and you have some relationships, people will come and work for scale, even if they're big stars. So to me, I'm always like, if I spend 25,000 to go make a short, I'm very limited on where I can like license that or who's gonna buy that short to get the money back. If I make the movie for $150,000, now all of a sudden I can license the movie to IFC, to BET, to A24, to so many more places. So and it's a thing that you own, right? That you can continue to monetize, especially if stars in that movie go on to continue to have bigger careers. So there's no perfect model, but I think for me, I'm always like, hey, go take a swing, go make the film, and just make it for less as possible, and try to own it or have a big piece of ownership in it.
Yeah, I'm just going to tag on. Ownership is important, without a doubt, and I think more important for us as Black people, because it's something we've been denied for a long while. So and put ego aside, ownership is important. You can control what you do with that IP, where you want it, and what comes of it, and also benefit from the spoils. So I definitely agree with that. Um, in terms of models, I don't see anything different to what Datari said that I'm seeing out there. So yeah, no, nothing particularly different to add.
As we wrap up, I would love to get a sense. We're here at the union. I'll put it this way. As we wrap this up, we're here under the names of BAFTA and AAFCA, which play unique roles in the United States and in the UK. And I'm curious how you all think about these different types of organizations, and if there's a thing or two that they could be doing that would be helpful for folks that are trying to get funding, right? How could these organizations be supportive in those ways?
I'll just say I've known Gil since I was a teenager, and what he has done, for the culture with AFCA, is been remarkable. He's one of our Angels, he's one of our leaders. He's always been, you know, at the forefront of bringing more attention to young filmmakers, to young actors, and shining a light on our work at the very beginning level. You know, like it's an interesting thing. I remember sitting in, you know, this is just one example. I remember sitting in the head of a studio. I'm always trying to be conscious of names. I don't want to say to put people in line of fire, but I remember sitting in with the head of a studio after Girls Trip came out, and he was basically like, man, that Tiffany Haddish came out of nowhere. And I'm like, Tiffany Haddish been around 15 years. Like, you just found out about Tiffany Haddish after Girls Trip. But it's organizations like AAFCA and BAFTA that will shine light on us way before the big studios are paying attention, right? Like they know who's making the small indies that are going to Sundance, people that are people of color, people, you know, these indies that are going to South by. They know who's making the docs at the very beginning, you know, like they're just so important to the culture because, again, in our business, you need people to endorse you. You need people to put their arm around you early on for people to even think that you are great or that you should get more opportunities. And Gil and AAFCA have been doing that for forever, and BAFTA as well. So, you know, they are, I don't think they're already doing everything, you know, so that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree, and particularly for AFCA, what you all do for the culture is super important. And yeah, without a doubt, I'm also grateful with BAFTA, given its voice and its reach, that it continues to support up and coming filmmaking and also underrepresented filmmakers. So they're doing, to Tari's point, they're doing all the right things. I hope other institutions of this, certainly for BAFTA stature, other institutions of the same caliber and the same reach take some of those learnings. I'm very grateful for AFCA for staying here with us and helping us find new talent and really helping to drive the agenda forward. So yeah.
Datari Turner, Jason Aidoo, I really appreciate both of you taking your time to be with us today and to take my questions. Let people know, like, if they're watching this and they're like, I want to follow Datari or I want to get in contact with Jason, like independent creatives, what is the best way for them to reach out to someone like you all?
Well, I'm on social media. I'm definitely not hard to find. You know, I'm on all the social handles, you know, Datari Turner on Instagram, Facebook. You know, IMDb has my contact information as well. I'm not hard to find. And I just want to say too, I'm still making movies under $1 million. Like we still are, we're in post on 2 small art house indies. One is premiering at Tribeca. We made this movie for 500 grand, first time filmmaker coming out of Columbia, you know, and we have another movie that we made for $1 million with a lot of stars in it. And that's still very important to me, is to, you know, get behind first and second time filmmakers. And I would just say, again, for everybody out there that's trying to get their movies made and financing, it never gets easy, no matter how big you get, no matter how many movies you get, but try to make the thing tiny, and you will have to beg, borrow, and steal a little bit. You'll have to, like, you know, you can piece the financing together. You don't have to go to somebody for, your budget is 250. You don't have to go to somebody for the whole 250. Go to them for 50. Go to, you know, try to piece it together, you know. But yeah, there's no easy way to do it. Everybody would be making movies and have all their movies financed, but you can get this done, you know. And if you got to put piece of it on credit cards, if you got to take out a little small loan, you just get it done, right? I mean, Singleton, I'll just say this last piece, like Singleton, like well after he was an icon in the business, well after he had made, you know, over 10 features, been nominated for Oscars, he still had to put his house up to finance Hustle and Flow. Literally, he had to take a loan out, take a second mortgage on his home to finance Hustle and Flow when he was already a legend in the game. So I'm just telling you, like, this doesn't get easier. Like it actually gets harder, you know, and you still have to prove yourself every single time out. It's like sports. Making movies is like sports. You got to prove yourself every single time out. It does not get easier. So I just wanted to say that piece.
Jason, how do people connect with you, and your last piece of advice for independent creatives?
I'm not on all the socials, but I am on X, and IMDb has my contact details. You can also follow Anscape, which is on all the socials, to find out more about us. I agree. Filmmaking is not easy. It certainly is not something you do if you want an easy life. We say it's a miracle every time we finish a film. It really is. And we are, again, part of the world's biggest filmmaker or storyteller out there. So it's an absolute miracle every time. And that is a blessing for you in terms of perseverance and overcoming those adversities. Those obstacles are going to be there throughout. So I totally agree with Datari. Be mindful that this is not a case I'm going to make my first feature and everything becomes easy. In fact, it's not. So if you're in it, stay with it, and yeah, the spores will prove themselves. So good luck to you all.
On behalf of AAFCA and BAFTA, I'm Jared Hill. I appreciate you both joining us today and hopping in with us to give us your perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. You guys were terrific, and we really could have gone into, I mean, gone on and on and on, because you guys really, really dropped some golden nuggets. So thank you, Datari. You and I talk all the time, and someone that I have a lot of belief and confidence in, because you know you walk the walk and you've proven. And Jason, I'm certainly looking forward to getting to know you and the work that you guys are doing even more. So let's definitely get together the next time you're back out on the left coast.
Absolutely.
Tina, do you have any closing remarks?
No, just on behalf of BAFTA, thank you so much. BAFTA and AAFCA, but I know you already said it. Just thank you so much again for your time and for your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. And Datari, great to meet you. Jarrett, also great to meet you. Thank you for hosting and chairing.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Jared. Thank
Absolutely.
you, Jason. Thank you, Gil. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Take
Talk to you
care.
soon.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Great job.
Bye.